Medicare does not pay for hot tubs. I joke all the time. If they did, my parents would probably have 2 of them.
Well, all you need is a lawmaker to realize that would be super popular. And then maybe they will get hot tubs added to the Medicare formulary. Hot tubs for everyone.
Yes. That should be on a shirt. Medicare hot tubs for everyone.
Medicare set-asides are confusing for many professionals. If that's the case, how much more confusing are they for the actual beneficiary? Today on Medivest, the podcast, Craig tells me how he explains MSAs to clients. His advice? Keep it simple.
So Craig, you have your CMSP.
I do.
Did you enjoy the process of getting your CMSP?
I did.
All those years ago?
I've written an MSA before. Yeah.
That's a requirement. It's the practicum for the CMSP.
It is.
Writing an MSP. Or writing an MSA.
Writing an MSA.
Sorry.
A lot of acronyms.
You know who I've never seen in a CMSP class?
Who?
A beneficiary.
I thought you were going to say Weird Al Yankovic.
I have never seen Weird Al Yankovic either.
He's a Medicare beneficiary now. I think he's 65. Just an FYI.
I mean, I'm sure.
I saw him in concert 2 weeks ago, and he was great.
Was he?
Yeah. I felt older than Weird Al. He had way too much energy.
Well, that is definitely a rabbit hole I would love to go down. But since we can't.
Yes.
Since you and I are not compensated to talk about such things.
No.
I want to talk a little bit today about the process of explaining a Medicare set-aside to a beneficiary. Because like I said, they're typically, as much as folks in our industry and the work comp industry and the liability industry know about MSAs and what they are, typically the beneficiary does not understand what that thing is.
That is correct.
You seem to say that with some confidence. So let's talk about the process of explaining an MSA to a beneficiary.
Okay.
What all that entails.
Yeah. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there. You have these situations where an attorney is learning about, depending on the type of case, whether it's comp or liability, especially in the liability arena, is just learning about a Medicare set-aside and what it is, and the whole goal being to protect benefits and make sure Medicare's interests are covered in the case. So a lot of times the injured party on the case doesn't necessarily know what a Medicare set-aside is, why it's even involved in the case, what it means. The things I hear frequently are probably the number one thing I hear is, why is the government taking my money, right? And usually what I'll do is I'll step in at that point and I will tell them, hey, let me explain this process to you. Let me tell you why this is really important. It's actually to your benefit to make sure that this is handled properly. So whether it's via phone call or Zoom call or in-person meetings, we'll sit down. And what really happens is I start out by explaining this really all goes back to the MSP statute from 1980. It says Medicare has rights as a secondary payer if there's a primary payer involved. And there's 5 primary plans: workers' compensation, no-fault insurance, self-insured plans, liability, and automobile insureds. I think I hit all 5 of them. So all of those plans are primary to Medicare based on this statute. So what traditionally has happened is that individual, when they're working on their case, is thinking that, hey, why the government wants me to take money out of my settlement. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to take it? Are they going to keep this money? Why do I have to do this? And there's a little bit, there can be some frustration and some anger there because they don't understand that process. But what the trip that I like to take people, I always call this a trip. I take them on a trip. I start at the beginning, and I'm going to kind of take you through. This is perfect because we're in Orlando. We're right by Disneyland. It's a trip. I'm just picturing Small World for some weird reason right now, and now I'm hearing the song, so that's my own fault.
Craig's little trip.
Yeah, but I'll let them know that because of that statute, you need to take their interest into consideration. A lot of times, the attorneys will explain the past medicals on a case, which is the liens. You got to pay Medicare back. If you don't pay Medicare back, there's fines and penalties associated with it. You don't pay it, it can go to Treasury, and they can start garnishing, they could potentially start garnishing Social Security disability payments until they get paid back. That's with the past medicals. On the future medicals, what I usually do is I will tell the individual that, look, this is for your future medical care, anything that's normally covered by Medicare would be paid out of this fund first in a post-settlement environment. If it's related to your case and it's a Medicare covered item, money is set aside out of your settlement, hence the name Medicare Set-Aside, and these funds will be used before Medicare is billed. So this isn't money that they're taking and they're running off with, or it's going into some room somewhere never to be seen again. This is actually for their benefit. So that MSA, and what I'll do is I'll go through the process of explaining how the MSA is prepared, and it's based on the medical records from their provider. Your doctor has said X, Y, and Z. Our nurses will go through and they will pull out the Medicare covered case-related items that are being recommended. So I'll take them on this trip and I'll say, at the end of this number that has come out of this report that's been put together, right? This number is Medicare's anticipated exposure over your life expectancy related to your case. And then that number is what is set aside, and that's the amount that you're supposed to use prior to ever billing Medicare. So I usually go, you need treatment, right? Are you taking medications? Yeah. Are you getting physical therapy? Yeah. Okay. These are Medicare covered items. It would be paid out of that. If you weren't doing this, you would still be responsible for paying this. So this is put in place to make sure that you are not taking your Medicare card, going to your provider, and trying to bill Medicare for something that you are being given money for as part of the settlement. So usually when I explain it like that, they're like, okay, now I understand. This is for my future medical bills. And then they're like, so I can just pay any of my medical bills out of this. And then I have to kind of back them down a little bit from that and say, this is only for Medicare covered case-related items, right? So we'll go through that process. And again, it all comes out of that statute from 1980. And then I'll go down the path of explaining to them, if you completely ignore this issue, or let's say you set that money aside and you choose to spend it however you want. You go buy a car, you go buy a boat. There were some studies done. I think the number one thing that individuals are misappropriating their MSA funds on are hot tubs, because it can be seen as therapeutic, right? Everybody's like, it makes me feel better. It's therapy. I feel great. I'm going to use my MSA. Medicare does not pay for hot tubs. I joke all the time. If they did, my parents would probably have 2 of them.
Well, all you need is a lawmaker to realize that would be super popular. And then maybe they will get hot tubs added to the Medicare formulary. Hot tubs for everyone. Yes.
That should be on a shirt. Medicare hot tubs for everyone. But, once I explain what that money is for, I kind of walk them through this, and then I tell them, hey, for these funds, there's guidelines on how you have to handle them too. You've got to spend these funds appropriately, and you have to be able to account for it. And if you do that, and these funds run out, and again, because the MSA, that number that we've given you is for your life expectancy. If that money runs out before your life expectancy, there's never really a good way to say that. If you pass away before this, if you don't pass away before this money's gone, right? Medicare will step in as long as you can prove that you've spent the money correctly, and Medicare will pay for those items going forward. So you're actually protecting your Medicare benefits by spending this money appropriately. Now, if you don't spend the money appropriately, then Medicare will just deny payments. That's how they enforce all of this. They're going to say, hey, you show us how you spent your MSA funds, and if they audit the file and look into it and realize that they weren't spent appropriately, they just won't pay until whatever has been spent is replaced, basically put back and spent appropriately. So that's really the trip that I take them on. That's what the MSA is. This is why it's important. This is what can happen if you don't do it. If you don't set money aside or use these funds properly. And then there's rules and guidelines, and that gets into the whole topic of administration. And I know we're just talking about the MSA, but that's kind of where I take them, and I say, hey, these are the 2 things that will happen with the funds. You can either self-administer those funds, and that traditionally is very risky. There's a lot of responsibilities that come along with it, or the funds can be professionally administered. I tell people that's a quality of life thing. It takes all these obligations off of your desk, makes things a lot easier for you. You can focus on getting treatment and getting better. We can handle all the details with it, and we become responsible for it.
I think the most common misconception I hear about or see, obviously our member services team talks to beneficiaries all the time, and even when we're in the process of trying to get their case onboarded, they think that their MSA is just their work comp coverage post settlement. So the expectation is this is the money that pays for everything having to do with my injury. And I think probably the most frequently any irritation over coverage or denial of certain expenses surrounds that particular issue. Has to do with the fact that it's related to my injury, you should pay for it. Well, it's not Medicare allowable, and so it was this. You would use other funds to pay for this, and then the idea that okay, so I received other settlement proceeds, but you are paying for my medical bills, so I can use those other settlement proceeds for something else, right? And frequently, I don't know what your experience is. When you look at the non, I realize it probably varies considerably, but the non-Medicare allowable portion of those reports, because when we write reports, we'll frequently project both for someone, right? Medicare allowable and the non-allowable injury-related. Do you see the non-allowable as typically being a larger number or a smaller number?
On it,
it can be anything.
I think in most cases it's probably smaller than the Medicare covered items. I'm always very cautious, and I say it all the time. Ray, who I refer to as the Oracle here, he's really burned this into my brain, and Nat as well. Medicare covered case-related items. I always try to be very clear when I'm talking with individuals and with attorneys. It's for Medicare covered case-related items, because if you end up in a situation where somebody gets it explained to them, this account just pays for your future medical treatment, you run into those situations. So I always try and be really clear about what this account is for, and again, redirect them to hey, if you need something that's not part of this MSA, it's not a Medicare covered item that you need, that would come out of your non-MSA funds, right? And again, those non-MSA funds don't have the restrictions and guidelines on them like MSA funds do. So there's some even more flexibility there. But the questions naturally will come up, like, what happens if I need something and it's not part of my MSA, but it's part of my case? So there is the ability to pay for those if it's related to the original injury. And that's something as an individual, you're going to have to, is this Medicare covered? You're going to have to determine that. And then if you pay for it and Medicare audits the file and disagrees, you're going to have to put that back. So one of the things I tell them, if you're working with an administrator on this, they're going to have to make that call. And if they make that call and they're wrong, they're going to have to fix that situation, not you as the individual. So if there was funds that were paid out for something that was questionable about whether or not it was related, and that Medicare looked at it and said, we don't agree with that, that administrator is responsible for that decision. So this takes a lot of risk. And again, on the administration side of things, it does take a lot of risk off of it. But this all starts with the MSA. If an MSA is being completed on the case, you do all this work to try and comply with that statute. You figure out the MSA amount, whether it's comp or liability. Let's say it's $50,000. You do all this work to find out what the anticipated future care is. Everything is going to be needed down to the penny. And then you just give the money to the individual and say, go handle this all according to the rules, right? It's not necessarily the best situation, especially on complex cases. A lot of injured parties have never had a substantial amount of money at one time before.
Right.
And putting them in a position to go from maybe having $1,000 in a savings account to having $300,000 that's supposed to specifically be used for their Medicare bills, there's a lot of temptation. There's a lot of outside influence that comes in. I've seen this. You have family members that come in. People want to do certain things, and somebody may be feeling okay right now. Maybe they're in a good spot with their condition, but that doesn't mean in 2 years they're not going to wake up and go get a surgery that they need because they are just in pain from something. There's always a possibility. So this MSA is really there to protect that individual at the end of the day and make sure if their condition does deteriorate, that money's there to pay. Your clients trust you to protect their future. With professional MSA administration from Medivest, you ensure their compliance, financial security, and peace of mind long after settlement. Call 877-725-2467 or visit medivest.com to learn more.
I think a useful distinction is, and I see that not only the beneficiaries confuse this sometimes, but sometimes claimant or applicants counsel, even payers, they get the impression that they'll get that report, like that MSA report, and they'll go to that sheet that has the spreadsheet on it, and they'll look at all the items on there.
Yeah.
And they'll say, these are the items that my MSA is supposed to pay for.
Right.
And if it's on this list, it can pay for it. But if it's not on this list, it's not intended to pay for that.
It's a moving target.
Right. Typically try to explain to them that the MSA is a methodology. It's a process you go through to identify a reasonable consideration of Medicare's interests. But once you fund it, care changes, formulary changes, prices change, right? Like the MSA is like present value.
Yeah, it is.
That ain't going to stick around.
Yeah,
I think Medicare, I want to say last year, health expenses, not just Medicare, but health expenses in general had an inflationary factor of something like 15%.
Yeah.
We have some of the most expensive healthcare in the world. That funding number this is a digression, but that funding number is not going to stick around.
All the more reason to make sure that money is spent correctly, right? Right. Because if those things are going to get more expensive over time, and those funds are going to dissipate quicker.
I'm going to throw you a question. This is a zinger. Are you ready?
Go for it.
Medicare Set-Aside money.
Yes.
Is that Medicare's money or is that the claimant's money?
That is money for the individual's future medical treatment. I don't see a situation where Medicare would take that money, stick it into an account somewhere. There'd have to be some sort of trade-off there, right? If it was Medicare's money. But I guess you could make that. Is there an answer to this question?
I told you that's a nasty,
that's a nasty question. Right. Because, if you do nothing with this, they can assume the entire settlement amount is in a work comp case. I will put that little caveat. As of right now, the way it's written, in a work comp case, they can assume the entire net settlement to the individual is the future medical account, right? But what happens if that individual never bills Medicare for anything? Is it Medicare's money? Would it be considered Medicare's money?
It's intended to pay an expense that Medicare would normally pay. So it's money being spent in place of Medicare. Doesn't make it Medicare's money. It is money that's being spent for the benefit of the individual, for the beneficiary, the injured party. It's being spent on their injury. So in that respect, it's a
matter
money.
Of perspective, isn't it? Is this my money or is this Medicare's money? When I discuss this with clients, I usually tell them, here's the two options. Somebody who chooses to self-administer their account is going to have direct control of those funds. They just need to understand that if they spend that money and they misappropriate it and they try to bill Medicare for anything, Medicare is going to deny it, which kind of gets into the Section 111 piece, which I do mention as part of that trip that I was talking about earlier. That Section 111 piece is the primary payers, which is the source of funds for the settlement typically. There's some other entities that can come into place that are reporting information under Section 111, also called mandatory reporting. They're reporting all these data fields to Medicare. So what I explained to the attorney and their client is Medicare is going to know about this case. If you are a Medicare beneficiary at the time of settlement, Medicare is going to know about this case. They have over 200 data fields that get sent over to Medicare. Medicare is going to know what body parts are associated with it, the treatment codes. They're going to know all the parties involved. They're going to put a marker in their system so they know if they ever get a bill for this particular item, that they're not the primary payer. They're just going to deny payments, and that's going to force you to use your settlement funds, or if you're in a situation where you misappropriated that money, you're going to have to pay out of pocket or potentially not get treatment until you can find the money, right? So because of Section 111, and this is something that's interesting when I'm dealing with the beneficiary and their attorney, they're not the ones doing the reporting. They're not reporting this information. It's coming from a completely separate department, typically with the insurance company, and they're reporting this information. It's kind of going on in the background, and I have a feeling there's not these discussions between the two parties going, hey, we've reported all this data, so make sure that you address this issue. One of the interesting things I see right now is on liability settlements, I'm seeing defense side is just putting language into the settlement agreements that said, any MSA issues are the responsibility of you and your client. Any liens that need to be paid back will be taken care of by you, and basically you agree to take care of all these issues, which is the complete opposite of workers' compensation. In workers' compensation, the MSAs are almost exclusively done by the insurance companies, and they're the ones kind of controlling that process and going through it. Liability, it's almost the complete opposite. But on a liability case, there's a lot of education that needs to be done with the attorneys because of guidelines and regulations. Those Medicare hasn't issued guidelines like they have in comp. So this is a very gray area on liability. But if you look at the statute, which I take everybody back to the statute that says, workers' compensation, liability is also one of those plans that's primary to Medicare. And they're reporting all that information to Medicare. So if I'm working with the attorney and their client, they usually don't know about that unless I bring it up with them. But it's just, I use the words checks and balances all the time. It's a way to keep everything, in balance on the case, make sure Medicare knows about it, and make sure the burden's not being shifted, right? So if they're denying payments and you don't do anything to address this issue about future medicals and you try to bill Medicare, they're going to deny it.
See, I think this issue it's so important to explain this well to a beneficiary. And it is a hard thing to explain.
I've found in 18 years, keep it simple. Keep it simple, but help them understand why it's you always need to understand the why. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? Those are all the things. And I can go into codes and regulations and all that, but at the end of the day, I always try to make sure they understand the concept behind it, the why behind it. This is what it means if you don't do this. This is how it can affect you if you don't do this.
Well, the vast majority of MSAs are self-administered.
Yes.
Right. So the settlement is handing the money to the beneficiary to use with an implicit expectation that it is going to be used to protect their benefit and to protect Medicare, which are both the same thing.
Yeah.
But their access to that benefit being very important, particularly if they have a lot of ongoing medical expenses. But they're handed that money, and if they don't understand its purpose and its use effectively, their capacity to use that money, I would make the argument even if they do understand it, its use.
I wouldn't want to do it. I know what goes into administering the funds.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to touch that. I'd much rather have somebody else handle that for me.
Sure, but even if they are going to be administering themselves,
yeah,
it's essential, I think, that they understand
Absolutely.
what it's for and how it's to be used. And then also on the, if you are using professional administration for that money, our experience, we spend a considerable amount of time on the front end educating the beneficiary on the purpose of that money so that we can work together on that. So the expectations are clear. They know how it's to be used. They understand what's going to happen if it exhausts temporarily or permanently.
Yeah.
They understand how we're going to work with Medicare to inform them such that they become primary in that situation. But you definitely can't I don't think you can gloss over the beneficiary's understanding of the situation. I would also argue, just to extend beyond the MSA piece, very frequently a beneficiary who has settled a claim is not fully up to speed on what they've just done. Like they don't necessarily understand the full scope of what it means to settle a work comp claim and what the expectation is.
It's a lot of moving parts.
It's a lot of moving parts. You may not be seeing the same physicians. You may have to find new doctors.
Yeah.
The costs you pay.
If it's comp,
may be
you've been in the system for a long time. You know,
Yeah.
you've had discussions about where you can and can't go, who's approved, who's not. You know, and that changes in a post-settlement environment. You know, so for somebody who's self-administering, they're going to have to go sort that out all on their own. They're going to have to figure out what's Medicare covered, what's not, what's case-related, what's not, what's the right amount of pay for those things. And I find that, especially in comp, it's an issue that comes up on cases. The MSAs are thrown in, but I do feel like there is a lack of information that kind of makes its way over to the other side when it comes to that post-settlement environment and what that looks like. And, you know, we do it all the time. You know, we have phone calls with individuals, and we do go into this kind of stuff. Say, you know, it's one of the things that I always expect to smile on is when we tell them, hey, you know, you are not bound by these constraints that you've been in before. You know, we just have to make sure it's Medicare covered, case related, right? Those are the major ones. I don't say that that's everything, but those are the major ones. You know, so people spend time looking for providers. People find doctors that they like and they want to go see them, you know, and that's important. And to have that freedom, you know, gives you some, you know, it definitely gives you some control over your future and how you want it.
Frequently they move.
Yeah.
Right? Like they may have not necessarily been able to relocate.
Yeah.
Because of the providers that we frequently see them move. You know what happens when you move is your the rates that you pay change.
Everything changes. Yeah.
Everything changes.
Every zip code number is different, right?
But yeah, so I guess main takeaways here. What would you say? How would you advise an individual who has the responsibility, whether it be their counsel or their adjuster they're working with, a settlement broker, or someone involved there? How would you advise them as they take up the responsibility of communicating what the Medicare Set-Aside is to the beneficiary? How would you counsel them to communicate that? I mean, you've already said keep it simple. Yeah. What else would you give them?
I think I always like to start with the statute. This is the why. It's always the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this included? Why is it important? You know, there can be trust issues between the two parties too. So, you know, you may be running into a little bit of that where, you know, somebody doesn't trust what's going on. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important to share information between the parties, you know, with their defense, plaintiff, applicant, about what's going on, why the MSA is involved in the case, and what it's supposed to be used for. One of the strongest pieces that I use is that those terms and conditions for self-admin, because those actually say, hey, this number, this amount, you understand, you know, you have an idea what this is for, right? When you get into the terms and conditions for self-administration, it outlines a lot of that stuff. And I see a lot of people that will look at that, start asking questions. You know, if they get that and, you know, maybe defense has sent it over or the attorney,
You're talking about like self-admin toolkit type of thing? Or
yeah, just the terms and conditions for self-admin, just the 2-page guidelines.
Got it.
That come from Medicare's website about what to do with the money, right? So when people get that in their hands, they typically will read it and start asking questions. And then it usually leads back to, okay, so tell me about this MSA thing again. You know, so I think it's important to get the right information across, whether you're representing the party or it's a defense. This is what it's for. This is how it works, and just put them in a situation. Because again, Medicare could come back to anybody who's touched funds on the case, right? We have insurance companies that will do this to meet that requirement. They've kind of taken the reins on that in work comp. And they put all this work in, but is it really in the best interest of that individual to not share all the information on that case? And I think some of it, you know, I do a lot of CE and CLE training on behalf of Medivest, And I think a lot of those individuals have so much, especially if it's examiners, they have a lot of stuff on their desk. And they have a lot of cases too.
Yep.
So it's really hard to go into detail on a lot of this stuff and make sure that information is conveyed. It's usually, hey, we got to do an MSA because of this issue. And the MSA goes over and they share it with the other side. And that's, sometimes that's kind of where it ends, right? Maybe there's a discussion about administration. Maybe the insurance carrier requires administration because they realize that's really in the best interest of that individual too. We've seen a lot of situations where insurance companies are willing to pay for administration, right? As opposed to letting somebody take that over, knowing that in most cases they're going to end up in a bad situation. So sharing that information and keeping people up to speed is beneficial to everybody. Because Medicare can come back to anybody who's touched the funds. I mean, they always leave that open. Do they go to the individual? They typically will deny payments. However, you want to make sure that information is being shared. You want to paper the file. If somebody's going to self-administer, you want to have them sign those terms and conditions for self-admin, because that's that person's way of acknowledging that I've read through this. It's at least been presented to me, and I'm going to read through it, hopefully understand it. And I say hopefully because it can get complicated, especially on a complicated case, a catastrophic case. What's covered, what's not Medicare covered. So that was a very long answer to your question, but I think at the end of the day, the more information that you share and present the options, just the why. Go into the why. Why should you, why are we doing an MSA? Why is this recommended? Why am I putting this money into this account? Why am I spending this money a certain way? Those all go back to protecting the benefits for the individual.
And nobody is reminding that beneficiary of that anniversary attestation that they need to submit to inform Medicare of how the money has been spent.
You're going to see that in the terms and conditions for self-administration, but nobody is going to be sitting on their shoulder reminding them like, hey, you need to fill out paperwork. You need to give us the receipts. If it's comp case, you gotta let us know what's going on with it.
Right.
And that's where they're going to have exposure. If they don't do those things properly, don't spend the money properly, it has long-term impact.
All right, Craig. I think we're going to leave that one there. Thanks.
Thank you.